I see that we're live. Very excited about this, folks. Okay, I'm trying to master this entire go live on Instagram thing. Okay, I got it to work. Aren't you proud of me? I'm proud of me. Okay, everyone, welcome. Juliana here. I am very excited to have you here tonight. We are going to be talking about a very, very special book, Speak Out and Help Her Recover. I want to invite those that are starting to tune in, come on in. As you are tuning in, I'm just going to post on screen. There is the short link to get the book, Speak Out and Help Her Recover. And tonight we're going to be talking with one of the authors. This is an anthology of stories and a powerful anthology. So I'm very excited to get that going. I do want to let everyone know, while we are running this whole episode, you can submit your comments, your questions at any point on whatever social platform you're on, whether that's LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or Instagram. I should get them directly in front of me. So I would really love to be able to take your questions and your comments and share those with our amazing guest today. So please do not be shy, whether it's a question or a comment. It means a lot. Chances are, if you are wondering or thinking it, someone else is too. So with that, I am going to, let's see here. There we go. Perfect. I think we're good. All right. So, folks, it was recently International Women's Day, and I'm board chair for an organization called Rituals for Recovery that recently published this book. And that has given me a pretty great opportunity to talk with the authors. And that's what we're going to do today in honor of this occasion. Essentially gives us the excuse, the reason to stop and make time and space for this. And with that, we're going to be focusing on one author's story today. Now, I want to introduce this author. She's going to join us in studio in just 1 second. But before I bring her in, I'm going to introduce our upcoming guest. So, Erin Hellier. Erin experienced emotional, psychological, mental, financial, sexual, and physical abuse in her marriage. She left with nothing, not even her son. Years later, a wonderful yoga teacher introduced her to Rituals for Recovery, and this is where her healing journey began. Erin learned about narcissistic abuse and its long-lasting effects. She started therapy and learned about CPTSD, which can be caused by years of experiencing narcissistic abuse. After learning about trauma-responsive mind-body healing and somatics, Erin is now on her way to becoming a trauma-responsive mind-body wellness and cell somatic teacher to help others begin to heal. Erin resides in Peterborough, Ontario, and is a dental receptionist and a full-time single mom. And with that, I am very happy to welcome Erin Hellier. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you, Erin?
I'm good, thank you. And yourself?
I'm good. I'm excited to have this conversation. Again, folks, Erin has written a pretty incredible story in Speak Out and Help Her Recover. We're going to be talking about that today. You've got the link on the screen to buy the book, and I please invite any of your comments and questions. And with that, Erin, do not be irritated with me if I'm looking in different spots because I've got notes and stuff. I have a terrible memory. Okay, so I almost don't know where to start because there are so many things about your story that pop out to me. Why don't you take a moment and tell us what your story is about? There's so many different kinds of abuse, so many different kinds of trauma. Tell us about the context here for you.
So I was married to a man who very slowly at first over time began abusing me in ways that were very confusing.
Mhm.
Um, he would make me think that I didn't remember, certain things he had told me, or I had misremembered things he had told me. It was just a very slow build up to what in the end ended up being very extreme abuse. I ended up, checking myself into mental health facility on an emergency stay. Physical abuse became a part of the marriage,
Mhm.
sexual abuse. Financial withholding money, me having to earn money from him. Um, but it really built up over, the period of 10 years that I was married to him.
Mhm. And one of the unique or maybe not so unique features, I think, of your story is the age difference, right?
Yes.
He was significantly older than you, I think, for, by a lot of people's measure. And I think by virtue of being with someone older, you almost expect them to know better. And there comes built in this notion of I'm safe and I can trust because this person's been where I've been long enough ago that they're just wiser and better.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. You think that someone like that is going to be, established and sort of beginning to have life figured out way more than I would have. I was 24 when I first met my ex-husband, and he was turning 40. And I did feel a sense of security with this older, sort of charming British man who everybody just seemed to love. Um, and I soon found out that most of that was a lie.
and it's so interesting how validation can form step one, in a relationship that ends up going down a completely different path. Um, and definitely when I read through your story, and I read it twice, that theme of confusion is definitely prominent. And I think this is an important opportunity for us to just stop for a second and talk about the term gaslighting, because I feel like you experienced gaslighting in so many different ways.
Mhm.
And it's just one of those terms that everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people use, sometimes overuse, sometimes misuse. People don't necessarily know what it means. Um, and I think it's really important to take a second and understand. Can you tell us what gaslighting is in your experience?
Um, for me, a lot of it was um, flat out lying about things. For example, he told me he was, almost a Formula One race car driver. He told me he almost made the Olympic team for swimming and diving in his home country of England. And then I would turn around a few years later and ask him about those things. And he would say, either he didn't tell me that, or I embellished on what he had told me. Um, it would be things such as, he would do outrageous things that are unacceptable to do to another human being.
Hmm.
And when I would have quite a normal reaction to those things, um, he would tell me I was overreacting, that, it wasn't that big of a deal. Why was I making things such a big deal that didn't even matter? Um, but I think it's of course just to keep you in confusion so that you're constantly questioning if you're I questioned all the time if I was crazy, if I was losing my mind.
Hmm.
He would insinuate that I had early onset dementia. He
Hmm.
would insinuate that, well, not just insinuate, he convinced me and a lot of other medical professionals that I had bipolar disorder.
Mhm.
So it's just a whole bunch of just constant things to make you confused. And it also then makes you rely on him even more because you think you don't know what's happening and you don't know why, you don't understand what's going on. So you look to him for the answers for everything because you think that he's the more stable one than you are.
And he's convinced you of it.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you used this word in your story. I don't recall it specifically, but the word that kept popping up for me is this feeling of being disoriented, like being in your own skin, but not knowing what's right or wrong, what's up and down. And I think, gaslighting, it can easily be understood as sort of someone trying to replace your reality with their reality.
Mhm. Yes.
But there was something more going on there in terms of what mattered to you was being erased, and what mattered to him, it won the day. So it wasn't just your version of truth or your experience that he was negating. It seemed to me as if even the things that matter in life
Mhm.
were up in the air. Does,
Yeah.
does disorienting feel like a proper word?
Yes, definitely. You know, he definitely in the end would, um, separate me from
Mm,
friends and family. And, anytime there was any sort of special occasion that I would be excited about, always on that day, some sort of crisis would befall him. So he would become the most important person of that day. And I would have to kind of forego what I was looking forward to sort of take care of him, if you will. Um, and it was really just a isolating experience because it's embarrassing and you're ashamed for the way that your partner is acting because he would slip up at times, certainly in front of my parents, and they would see how he would behave and they
mm,
would ask me about it, and you're always just covering up for him
mhm,
because
mm.
what is the alternative? You admit that you've been completely duped by somebody. It's
Yeah.
almost too much for the mind to comprehend.
Oh, it's like the ultimate in gaslighting, right? You can't even. It's true that this notion that um, we've made a mistake, and
Mhm.
it's this fatal flaw. It will sometimes stand in the way of us speaking up and getting help. What made you want to tell your story, to be a part of this project, and to write your story, contribute to this book? What made you ready, or what made you want to do it?
You know, for the longest time, even after I left my marriage, I didn't know what happened to me. I certainly, in the end, knew I had been abused with the
Mhm,
more blatant things that had gone on. But I didn't know what narcissistic abuse was. I, of
mhm,
course, had heard the term narcissist, but
mhm.
a lot of times it's just used for maybe somebody who's kind of not very nice.
Sure.
I didn't realize the full scope of what somebody with narcissistic personality disorder
Mhm,
could do. And I just always felt like if I had been aware of that, maybe I could have seen this coming. Maybe I could have
mhm,
seen what was going on. And I just think bringing this to the forefront so other people can, have more and more stories out there to be able to read. Maybe they're going through this situation. Maybe my words can help somebody or make them realize that, you know, what they're going through is not normal. They're
mhm,
not crazy and
mhm.
they need to get out of that situation.
I'm going to stop for a second, and I want to read just a small segment from your story. My husband used my confusion as an excuse to attend doctor appointments with me. He would explain what was really happening, and the doctors accepted his version of me. As a medical professional himself, every doctor he spoke with believed his explanation of everything. I was no help to myself, and I didn't know what was going on by this point. Why couldn't I remember things he had told me? Why was I confused and constantly getting things I could remember mixed up? Nothing was making any sense. The doctors increased my medications to near maximum doses because they were not working for me. Things began to become more than the emotional and mental abuse I had been experiencing. This is when I knew for certain that I was being abused. I think it's really easy for this conversation to focus on your story. But there is this other guy here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he is aware? Do you think he has regret and pain?
I don't think he has any regret or any pain. I think he tells himself a story so that he is somehow the good guy in this situation.
Yeah.
As a side note, I'm not the first woman who he's treated like this. He was married prior to me, and I should have realized the red flag as soon as I met him, and he described his ex-wife as being crazy, his sister as being crazy, his deceased mother as being crazy. I think this is just a pattern for him that he just starts over and over again,
Yeah.
and never learns from it.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why I ask that question is because I'm always curious about, who needs to be tuning in, who needs to be hearing this story today. Things work out the way they're supposed to in the universe, and you and I are having this conversation, and someone's tuning in who's supposed to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought right before we came on, what if the person who needs to hear it is actually somebody who is narcissistic and is doing this to someone?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but want to take the opportunity to say it's actually true strength to see a weakness in yourself and identify it, and probe deeper. And I know it doesn't feel like it. I know it feels like strength to dig in your heels and pretend everything's fine. But that doesn't make you good. That doesn't make you strong. And the goal of the narcissist is to be lovable and perfect. So why not do it really? It's just such a shame that this is that the cycle, that this is that you had to live through again. We do have a question, Keith. Thank you so much for your question. What are some of the red flags as family physicians we can look for to recognize this type of abuse? It's a great question, Keith. Thank you.
I think if somebody comes in and, well, first of all, like in my case, my ex-husband was insistent on coming into appointments with me. I think that's a huge red flag. I think another red flag is if the person who's being abused is confused and doesn't understand what's going on and doesn't understand why they're like this. I think that confusion is another red flag to look out for, because, a lot of times if somebody is, say, depressed or anxious, they'll kind of have reasons for that and sort of know how they got there. Whereas for myself, I had no idea how I had gotten there. I just knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that root cause conversation. When did it start? How did you feel when it started? Tell me about that moment. What do you remember? It is so critical. And I'm not sure that there's any science to this, to being able to spot this stuff, but I really appreciate the question and the answer there, Erin. I imagine that admitting or accepting the situation that you were in and that you needed help was probably one of the biggest hurdles. Was that something that you knew but struggled with, or did it come to light in some other way?
So, when I left, I knew obviously I had gone through something very traumatic. I wasn't ready for the longest time to begin to dive into what happened because having to replay all that stuff and relive it was more than I could handle.
Mhm,
But I knew when I went to a conference, a virtual conference with Rituals for Recovery, and I
mhm,
saw Heather Kent speaking about narcissistic abuse, and a light bulb
mhm,
went off in my head. All of a sudden, I immediately read her book, and it could have been written about my own life. And I knew then in that moment that I needed help. And of course, Heather ended up becoming my own therapist.
mhm.
And that's when I knew that, I couldn't just keep shoving this down the way I had been. Um, I was angry and I was very bitter and I wasn't the best version of myself. And I knew that I had to get professional help to
Mhm.
this.
Incredible. I wonder, these kinds of experiences can be transformational, and there's no doubt I've read your story. There's no doubt you've found purpose, a silver lining in this mess. Can you tell me a little bit about who you were before this and who you are now? How has this changed you?
Before this, do you mean before I met Paul or before I started healing?
Before you met Paul?
Um, I mean, I was a typical 20-something-year-old girl. I was very carefree. I loved hanging out with my friends and, going out dancing. Um, I was kind of just a go with the flow type of person who really didn't have a care in the world. I had an amazing upbringing. My
Mhm,
parents are incredible.
mhm,
Um, and I really just thought the sky was the limit for me before I met Paul. And I think now one of the hardest things is knowing I'll never go back to being that. Although I love who I am now, um, on my healing journey, I teach yoga now. I connect with lots of other women who have been through traumatic events. Um, I'm becoming a Reiki healer. I'm much more calm and peaceful than I've ever been in my whole life. But it's hard letting go of that past version of myself. And I always kind of thought that healing was getting back to who I was before. And
mhm.
now I know it's just becoming somebody new and somebody better and somebody more aware of what's going on.
Yeah, there's this sort of theme of that loss of innocence that can't ever come back, um, and that is okay in and of itself because we do grow up. Everyone goes through this sort of loss of innocence. Um, However, this transformation was imposed upon you. It wasn't one that you got to choose or navigate yourself. So that's got to be tough. I'm just taking a look here. Hello, thank you for the kind messages. We do have another question from Keith, actually. So you mentioned that the abuser was a physician.
He was a,
Now,
he was a pharmacist.
yeah, so a pharmacist, so not a physician, but in the healthcare services. So the question goes on. I can imagine they would be quite intimidating and challenge the authority or decisions made independent of family physicians, working with the patient and excluding the spouse. Terribly difficult to diffuse a narcissist. How to separate the patient from this toxic control of the clinical encounter. That's actually a really interesting thing because this past week, like you and I actually postponed this interview because I was unwell.
Yes.
And I have a health issue where I can get really foggy. And my husband and I were talking about my doctor's appointment, and he was saying, "Well, did you mention this? Did you cover that?" And I couldn't even remember what I had covered. And so I said, "Can you come with me to my next appointment?"
Mm-hmm.
But the characteristic difference between me bringing him along and what I read in your story, and please tell me your version of this because this is my assumption. For me, I think it was that he still deferred to me, and yes, I invited him, but the doctor didn't see that. Doctor just knew we were both there. But it was still my version of things that mattered. And even when I said I can't remember, I still got to say that first.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything like that, or was it kind like if the doctor was reading between the lines, they could see that you didn't have a voice at all?
I think if people would have looked more critically at it, they would have realized it was a lot of just Paul talking, that's my ex-husband, and saying what was happening, and him looking at me and saying, "Isn't that right? Isn't that right?"
Mm-hmm.
Rather than allowing me to speak up first and then maybe adding in like, "Oh, I think you know, forgot this or that." It was him narrating the entire thing at pretty much any doctor's appointment that
Mm-hmm.
I have. And it even got so far as, you know, even after we had separated, he had written into a contract with the Children's Aid Society that he could still have access to my medical doctors on his own to make sure I was still getting treatment and taking medications.
Wow. Like the amount of persuasion that that kind of thing requires, you were clearly dealing with someone who had done this many times.
Yes.
Because that's not an easy permission to just insert in there. It's incredible. I want to talk about the fact, and I mentioned this in just reading your biography when I introduced you, that you had to leave without your son.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned earlier that I thought maybe just accepting that you needed help might have been the biggest hurdle. But then then you had to get help. And from how I understand it, if you didn't get out and get help then, it was like putting on the mask on the airplane first for yourself before you put it on for your child. Um, Maybe it felt differently for you. I don't know. But I want to talk about that because I think that exact crossroads could hold so many women back from standing on their own 2 feet when they're ready to. Can you talk to me a little bit about that experience and how you worked up the bravery to do it?
So, at the point that I ended up leaving, Children's Aid had been involved for a while due to somebody anonymously calling them and telling them about the fights they were hearing Paul and I having.
Mm-hmm.
And they were totally on his side. Of course, it was just somebody else for him to convince that, you know, I was severely bipolar. I couldn't care for myself. I certainly couldn't care for a child. And at that point, I really couldn't. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know up from down anymore.
Yeah.
But I had to leave because in the end, I was fearing for my safety. Um, and in my heart, I knew that he would not do anything to our son because that would shatter the illusion of him being this mega, you know, amazing father.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew that if I left, I needed to bide my time until he would grow sick of having our child all the time. So I knew that was going to come, but I also knew I had to play by his rules in order for that to happen. But it was really a safety thing. I had to leave. Things were becoming very, very physical, and it just wasn't an option for me to stay anymore. And I was, of course, ended up being right about
Yeah.
it wasn't long before he started handing my son over a lot, as long as I was playing by the rules that he deemed to be necessary.
Mm-hmm. I fully respect that and really appreciate that explanation. I am always surprised, even though I know that this is just our human behavior. I'm always surprised at the fact that even when we know that we need help and there are not a lot of barriers, we still wait until we have no choice. We still wait till that moment of crisis. And and so I almost want to acknowledge, however you see the world, whether it's God, whether it's the universe, put you in a position where you had to walk away from that. And then the universe also put you in a position where you got your son back. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we, after some time, we were sharing custody, week on and week off, and COVID hit. And I know it was a horrible time for a lot of people, but in my life, it was a saving grace. My ex, of course, is a pharmacist, so worked in healthcare, and his new fiance, I guess you call her, is a nurse. And I was laid off because my job was one of the first ones to be laid off.
Mhm.
And he decided that my son would be better off staying with me quite a bit more than with him, because, nobody knew
Mm.
how fast you could catch COVID, how awful it was going to be, things like that. Um, And then once that started happening, um, I think he had some newfound freedom, and he loved not having to look after a child. And his visits became less and less, or he would arrange visits and he wouldn't show up, or, he would show up late and drop him off early. And then all of a sudden, one day, I was driving by his house and there was a sold sign in the yard,
Mm.
and he he moved out of Peterborough during COVID without telling us, which was awful, of course, for my son.
Mm.
That's his
Mm.
dad, even
Yeah,
though that's a whole other
sure,
dynamic between the two of them.
sure.
Um, but it was a blessing.
Yeah, it's just incredible how things, I don't know. I often talk with my therapist about flow, and I like control. And she's always telling me, "Flow, girl. I just go, just embrace what the universe is giving you." And you definitely went through it. But I'm also very grateful that some things worked out when you didn't have the control to drive the direction yourself. Can you talk to me really quickly about this? It doesn't have to be quickly, sorry. I just remember there's a point in your story where you talked about your current self and your past self. And I I'm aware that there are going to be people listening today or watching this recording that are in the state you were in a past period of this story. Looking back, what would you tell yourself? Is there some comfort? Is there some knowledge? Is there a mantra that carried you and still carries you something you wish you found earlier. If you can talk to me a little bit about that current and past self idea, that'd be great.
My past self was very trusting of people and very naive. Um, and I think, um, you know, that was a detriment to me. I think, though, the overriding thing that carried me through this is and always has been my son. If he wasn't here, honestly, I'm not sure where I would be, right.
Hmm.
Certainly not in the position I am. I probably would have just gone on being mad at the world and
Hmm.
angry at everybody, and never fully understanding what had gone on with my life. But I think I would tell my past self to be more gentle and be more kind with myself, and just allow yourself to work through the feelings and not try and mash everything down, and allow yourself to heal. For the longest time, I didn't allow myself to heal because it was too difficult.
Hmm.
But now that I'm more on the other side of it, I realize how important it is. I'm not the person I was even 3 or 4 years ago. I'm just constantly trying to evolve. I'm trying to help other women who are in this situation and just bring awareness to these narcissists. They try and suck the soul out of you, and they try and make you disappear. And
Hmm.
my ex succeeded in that for a while,
Hmm.
but I know that I'll never let that happen.
Hmm. There are some moments in this conversation where I see this joy, this smile on your face, and that was one of those moments. um, I'm glad that you mentioned anger. Uh, Anger is a funny emotion. It's a secondary emotion, and oftentimes we feel it and we think the anger is the problem. And you talk about this in your story, the fact that you were tending to the anger and giving the anger center stage, and then realized that it wasn't the anger that needed the attention. Can you talk to me about some of those other feelings, or how that anger was manifesting?
I think, 'cause anger's a more, if you want to say, easier emotion to deal with than, say, sadness, or acknowledging the trauma that had gone on with you. So I
Mhm.
think, once I sort of unpacked everything, I realized I wasn't angry at all. I was very sad and very disappointed.
Mhm.
And I think, I didn't trust myself at all. And that was very overwhelming when you can't trust your own feelings and emotions. I think that stirs up all sorts of things inside of you. And in my case, the majority of the feelings that I had manifested as anger, even though now I know I was never really angry.
Mhm. And it seems to me that by getting to the core of those emotions, you were actually able to take the next step in healing. Is that right?
That's right.
Mhm.
I, I grab onto all things healing now.
Yeah.
I love to go to yoga retreats, and I love, of course, to teach yoga and take yoga classes. I meditate and journal, and anything that can help me bring self-awareness to myself, and also to help me to understand others. You know, for the longest time, I was so angry at my ex-husband. I had, you know, lots of thoughts that are not very nice.
Mhm.
And I don't feel that anymore. I actually feel sorry for him because he's missing his child's life. He's missing, you know, a life that we could have had together. Um,
Mhm.
he's missing all the love that we had to offer. And I truly, in my heart, and the way that I reconcile it is that I don't think he was born this way. I
Mhm.
think something must have happened to him to make him this way.
Mhm.
And I feel bad for him for that, because what a miserable life to lead like
Yeah. Well, and it's so sad how when we have trauma or we have some kind of pain, when we don't work on healing, we often just project and extend that pain and make others suffer. It really is, there are some people on this earth that are truly evil, but the vast majority of people that behave badly, when we behave badly, we think on some even delusional level that we're doing the right thing.
yes.
And it is so sad when we fall for the lies instead of the truth, and get in our own way. It is, I hope he heals, because this cycle needs to stop. um, I also want to ask about the yoga. You mentioned something in your story, and forgive me for not knowing the exact wording, but you mentioned something about concentrating on your poses and then just sort of sinking into the practice itself, and how that unlocked healing for you. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people use yoga as just the physical practice and use it as exercise. I like the more healing aspects of yoga. The kind of yoga I teach is a lot of gentle, long held poses, and really just sinking into the mind body connection, and, you know, allowing your mind to be free, allowing yourself time to really focus on what's important to you, um, rather than the physicality of it. I
Mhm.
truly believe that um, yoga is made for our minds to heal, and also our bodies, but more focused on the mind.
So that's really interesting, because it's clear that throughout this journey, there were periods where you couldn't trust your mind. You didn't know what was going on. Um, but there was still something inside of you. There was something in your body that knew something was wrong,
Mhm.
and was pulling you towards the North Star. And so I want to ask, and I know that I'm asking in an anecdotal way, because no one can be an expert on everyone's experience. But in your experience, do you think you could have trusted your body even when you couldn't trust your mind, in order to tell you the red flags were there, or that it was time to run? Or I love this idea that we can trust our bodies, and I wonder if what lessons there might be there.
You know, I should have listened to, you know, they always talk about that feeling in your gut. And
Hmm.
if I would have listened to that long before it got as bad as it did,
Mm.
instead of reconciling in my head that, oh, well, you know, this isn't the guy that I met. Like, there must be something going on. I should have listened to my gut. I should have listened to the sinking feeling in my
Mhm.
chest. I should have listened to my hands that were shaking. Those are things that I should have paid more attention to, but I didn't, because the mind is so powerful in tricking you into thinking that everything is going to be okay, whereas the body has an uncontrollable reaction that I think a lot of times we ignore because we try and reconcile it in our heads.
Mm-hmm. And it's unfortunate because, look, I laughed when you said, you were trying to reconcile things in your mind, because I do this all the time where I'm like, but it doesn't make sense, and I don't want to drop it. But there is something really beautiful and amazing about the fact that our bodies already know what we need, and when we can breathe and embrace that and sink into it and just explore it without judgment, that we might already have the answers, which is pretty amazing. And what a blessing, that we're built with this homing device, right?
It
How
is.
incredible.
And I always just tell women, like, listen to what your gut is telling you. Your gut is telling you something for a reason, and we should never ignore that. All the times that I've ignored my gut feeling because I've let my mind take over, I've
Mhm.
always been wrong. And so I learned to listen to that feeling a lot more than I ever have.
Well, I definitely needed to hear that. So thank you. I'm just going to take a quick look because I see some messages going up and down here. Yep, thank you for joining. We're getting some folks that are really appreciating the episode here. Um, I've got another message here from LinkedIn. Thanks so much for the story. We are compiling some case studies to understand the reasons patients visit the family doctor and when virtual care would be appropriate. I cannot help but wonder that even though this abusive situation was missed within face-to-face visits, how much harder to see the red flags you mentioned during a virtual visit. Curious if you had uh, a longitudinal relationship with your family doctor, i.e., did they know you before the marriage? That's actually a great question. Did your doctor have a baseline?
My doctor did not have a baseline. I only knew my family doctor after I had been together with Paul for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So they never knew me um, beforehand. So
Mm-hmm.
I understand. I don't blame any healthcare professional for not realizing what had gone on because he was a con man, and he's a very good con man, and I understand why people fall for the things that he says because he's very convincing and he seems very trustworthy. Um, so, I do think it's important to um, maybe have a healthcare professional that you knew before
Mm-hmm.
the beginning of the abuse so they can see the difference, whereas somebody new who's just meeting me, they think this is just the way that I am. They don't
Mm-hmm.
realize the huge change that my personality had gone through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we live in a world today where there are a lot of assumptions made based on the groups we belong to and the sort of group identities that we have. And I have a lot of opinions about that because I don't think any one group that I identify with defines me, right? I'm sort of an intersection of all these things. It's like we all have our own fingerprint of intersections of experiences. And I think for this reason, I think this exact reason, it is so necessary to hear individual stories, because we can't learn and do better in the meantime without the anecdotal experiences and the insights that opens up. So, it's one thing to say, oh, statistics show, and, on average, but it's a whole other thing to understand how something manifests in someone's actual story and then be able to spot those signs again. Because, I'm sure he is using similar tactics again and again.
Yes.
Um, so, yeah, just so many feelings and thoughts, and I honestly could go on for a long time. But recognizing that, I appreciate everyone's time, and we've got a lot of really awesome viewers that have stuck with us the entire time, which means a lot. So on that note, I do want to try and bring this to a close. And I have one question that I think is huge, but I need to ask it. Are there stigmas, misconceptions, lies, shoulds that you bought into, not from him, but that you bought into, whether it was from the greater society or just your own self-imposed notions, that you have learned are wrong now and you can flag for us?
I think one of the biggest things I learned is that love is not immediate when you meet somebody. You don't meet somebody and you're immediately soulmates. You immediately fall in love with them. You immediately have all these connections. I think love is built slowly over time and getting to know somebody. And that's something that I didn't realize, especially not all those years ago. I thought, the fairy tale love was the real kind of love. And I definitely know now that it is not.
Yeah, that's actually a really powerful one. My family and I, we were watching Bring It On, which is like a really lame cheerleading movie
I
from
love
the
that.
90s. I still know the cheers and all of that from my teenage days, but we have a difficulty because finding something that's somewhat appropriate for everyone, because we've got a teenager, we've got a younger daughter, and that was one that kind of kept everyone watching. And there was this point um, near the end, I guess, where the main character is realizing, like, people aren't very nice, and people will hurt you. And essentially, it was her boyfriend who had been lying to her, and I'm sitting there going, to this day, I still think that boys will treat you this way, and it's TV that gave me the wrong idea. I'm a grown woman and I know better. So I really do feel that fairy tale wish and hope and lie that we buy into. But usually life is great, just not as clean and tidy. It's much messier. And it's an important thing, if you have any idealized notions of anything, really just ask yourself, challenge yourself. Is this what I really need? Is this what I really want it to be? I remember my very first boyfriend. I didn't really think we had a relationship until we had our first fight, because I thought that was necessary. And I was like, oh, I'm so proud of us. We had a fight. Like, how backwards. So anyways, that really speaks to me, that notion of the fairy tale relationship. Now, I had asked you earlier, just before we went live, where people can find you online, and so they can see your Instagram handle on screen. But I want to give you the opportunity to let people know where they can find you, because I know you're going to continue to tell this story and to do great things. So let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, so specifically my Instagram, at Erin Hellier. I use my platform as much as humanly possible to bring awareness to narcissistic abuse and everything that entails, because it's such a huge scope of things that it can cover. Some women might experience emotional and financial abuse, or some might experience psychological and sexual abuse, or some might experience all the abuses that can come along with narcissistic abuse. So I just try and bring awareness to all the different types of narcissists out there, and also all the different kind of abuses that they will try to impose on you as well.
Mm-hmm. It's like a literacy. It's like financial literacy. You have to know the foundations in order to spot it and in order to be proactive.
Yes.
So I think that your story is invaluable, and and we've got comments to that effect. A powerful story. Thank you. Thank you. Prayer hands. Erin, I want to thank you for your time, and I want you to stick around in the studio because I want to have a few minutes just after we wrap up here. But yeah, I really want to thank you for sharing your story, and I definitely want to stay in touch and bring this message to folks whenever you've got something more to share.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you, using your platform to bring awareness, of course, to the book, but also to, this kind of abuse that really does affect a lot of not only women, but men as well.
I appreciate that you said that because it's just such a complicated world. And I don't want someone to sit here listening to this thinking that they don't have a right to speak up. And that is absolutely like maybe the biggest misconception I don't want anyone to walk away with. If you are hurting, talk to someone. Definitely. Because that's where it starts. And that's how you can find out what help you need and what help you can get. And it is out there. So, Erin, thank you so much. I am going to sign off with folks. You have just been incredible tonight. Our audience has been consistent from about like 5 minutes in, and your attention, your eyeballs, your ears, your hearts, your minds, it really truly means the world to me. Whatever platform you joined on, thank you so much. And please share this conversation. The video will be available on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, so you can share the video. I want to call out, speak out, and help her recover. You can go to the URL at the bottom of the screen. That'll bring you right to Amazon, and you can pick up a hard copy or an ebook. And I really just appreciate the opportunity to share this story and to have you all here. I wish you all a wonderful, wonderful week, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.